Well, over to the big stories in East Asia. China has hit back at the United States, saying that Washington's new wave of tariff hikes over Chinese imports amounts to bullying. Well, this comes after Beijing vowed to take resolute measures against the Biden administration. A Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi says the tariffs prove that Washington has lost its confidence and that it shows Americans have reached the point of losing their minds. China also reiterated its position that it firmly opposes the United States' violation of WTO rules and pledged to take necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. Well, U.S. President Joe Biden is hiking tariffs on imports from China, including semiconductors, solar cells, and critical minerals. The electric vehicle sector faces one of the steepest hikes, a 100% border tax. Beijing has called the additional tariffs a political manipulation, with the move coming ahead of U.S. elections this year. Well, Biden reportedly said he is prepared for counter tariffs, adding that it would not lead to global conflict. And for more on this, we're joined by Chong Ja Ian, an associate professor from the Department of Political Science in National University of Singapore. Well, thanks very much, Professor, for joining us. So let's just start with all that reactions that's coming out of China. How should we interpret its foreign minister's, fiery remarks accusing the U.S. of bullying, losing its mind, and being out of order?
Well, on some level, it's just another day in this U.S.-China rivalry. We've heard angry words from both sides before, and I guess it comes down to what we actually see of it in terms of what retaliation the PRC takes. But at some point, we have to realize that this friction between Washington and Beijing gets us to angry words. It gets us to tariff restrictions done by both sides. But at the end of the day, I think neither side really wants to sort of escalate things beyond control. Sometimes the angry words is a negotiation tactic. It's to sort of put the other side on the back foot. So we have to take these things with a pinch of salt. And ultimately, I think if you look at the tariffs, yes, 100% tariffs on EVs and all that, but it amounts to about $18 billion US. As of last year, the value of trade in goods and services between the US and the PRC was about $758.2 billion US. So yes, it's a big amount, but in terms of the overall amount of US PRC trade, it's not overwhelming. So let's put things in perspective.
So, Professor, there are some concerns out there that perhaps the Biden administration, they may have miscalculated by imposing these tariffs, as part of political maneuvering, but perhaps losing ground, hard-fought ground with China. So, in other words, you're saying that that is not a concern?
I mean, there will be a back and forth, right? I think there is going to be politics with this, just like when the PRC, puts restrictions on some U.S. tech going into the PRC. That's a political consideration as well. So yes, there will be a tit for tat. There will be some immediate loss, but I guess it depends on what you're gunning for. But the PRC, the subsidies that come in for their electric vehicles and a lot of their green energy, that's part of the dual circulation plan, right? They are subsidizing industries that that Beijing feels can get them ahead. Well, those subsidies also result in lower prices and also a lot of capacity, which they then have to export elsewhere. So those exports will be felt, those cheaper exports will be felt by countries importing them, right? So so that means that industries in similar areas will get hit. This is also why the talk about tariffs is not isolated to the U.S. You hear this in the PRC itself. So it would hit trade, but if the longer term game is to somehow protect your own industries, protect your own jobs, it's not a complete loss. There are things that go on beyond just the numbers.
And Professor Chong, in other words, you're not too worried about a full-blown trade war then with China?
So I think we've seen several rounds of this tit for tat between the PRC and the U.S. since really 2016, 2017 with the Trump administration. So this latest round, it's a ramping up. But so far, I think we haven't seen either side really want things to get out of control. There's a risk, yes, and the risk may have increased. But I think that sort of sense that the PRC and the U.S. both want fairly even keel, stabilized relations, even if it's competitive, means that I think the degree of escalation won't get too far, whatever the sort of angry words that we're hearing.
Right. And in the meantime, the EU as well, there are all these subsidy probes into Chinese new energy-related enterprises. Do you think this so-called US-China trade tensions at this moment is going to be affecting any of those investigations?
Well, it could. I mean, I suppose it will also come down to whether the PRC wants to use the WTO mechanisms. Yes, they may be stalled, but use those mechanisms against the US. But ultimately, China's efforts to kickstart its economy by subsidizing certain key industries is leading to a lot of capacity, and that capacity is being shipped overseas. That puts stress on the economies that are that are importing these goods. So it's very it's difficult to sort of say, okay, well, there's a clear-cut good guy and bad guy in here. It's part of the way that the sort of competitive economics, the sort of efforts to really jumpstart the Chinese economy are playing out. And of course, for the Europeans and the US, they want to be able to make sure their nascent industries are able to get up to speed as well. So it's a pretty complex calculation on all sides.
Always good talking to you. Thanks so much for your insights there. Chong Ja Ian, Associate Professor from the Department of Political Science at the National University of Singapore.